Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few different projects. This one specifically is on irrigation scheduling. Just see some of the farmers out there. How many farmers, show of hands, actually use irrigation scheduling? Exactly. That's pretty low numbers. And any reason, just shout it out. What are some of the reasons why maybe you don't use it, or some of the barriers? I'm doing a little bit of research here so I can.
What do you mean by irrigation schedule?
Well, I mean, there's different forms. Like, I mean, it's simple. Like, I know my crop's going to use 1/4 of an inch a day. 4 days down the road, I know I got to put on an inch. Very basic. Probably what most farmers actually do. A lot of what we're doing here is actual sensors and technology. So usually the few of the main barriers with irrigation scheduling is time. I mean, farmers don't have time to install sensors, maintain sensors, check them all the time, and then schedule on that. Again, cost. Cost is sometimes an issue. These sensors have come down in price quite a bit, so it's not necessarily that. I know a lot of guys don't like having sensors in the field. I mean, if you don't, you forget about them and plow over them or whatever. And third is probably, and I'll talk a little bit about it, is value, right? Water's cheap. And I don't mean that, I mean, essentially water's free, right? I mean, you're paying for maintenance of the equipment and the infrastructure and your pumping cost. But other than that, you're not really paying for the water. Wow.
Called water tax.
Yes and no, yeah, but I mean, that's coming back to infrastructure. You're not actually paying for the water, right? So water, in terms of that, that's where, so some of the things that we're working on is to try to address some of those situations. So first, the time in that, like, technology's come a long way. So we're looking at some of these technologies. In this field, we've got 3 actual sensor technologies. So we're looking at TDRs, which is a Sense-A-Terra product. We're looking at FDR, which is CropX. There's some dealers around here that supply CropX. And then we're also looking at the simple old gypsum block, basically similar to a resistance sensor that measures how much tension's in the soil and what's affecting the plant. All of those have now, you can get telemetry on them. So as long as you have cell service, which I know it can be spotty, you can access that from your phone. And a lot of these service providers actually do provide the installation, the maintenance and that, and you would just look at it on your phone. So we're looking at addressing some of that situation. Education-wise and how, we developed this manual, so the irrigation scheduling manual. This is a multi-province manual now. We had the green one, which was just for Saskatchewan. We've worked with Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario of kind of coming up with a little bit more regional application, but basically the irrigation scheduling information's the same no matter where you go. I mean, the environment changes, but the basic principles are still the same. And then we're also working with the University of Saskatchewan and Water Security Agency. They've implemented what's called flex allocation, like a pilot project in that. And so, I mean, that helps with the infrastructure portion of it. You're trying to utilize the same infrastructure and allowing you to, I mean, I don't want to, I'm a Fed, not a provincial guy, so I don't want to get into the licensing and that, but usually your water's tied to your land source, right? So the flex allocation idea, and you'll see the actual research project, and flex is going to be another stop, and the province will talk on it. But now you have the ability to move that water to different parcels of land, and so that adds not a price to the water, but it adds value to the water. So now as I use my scheduling and I increase my water use efficiency, any of my water savings could be transferred to another parcel and used to grow different crops. I know the issue in a lot of the conferences I go to in Alberta, they get that acre foot of water and there's no need to improve your efficiency because if I save that water, it just goes down to the next guy, right? I mean, in general, you want to be a good steward of the water, but you also want to use what's allocated to you too. So flex allocation basically gives an improved value to the water and hopefully makes irrigation scheduling a little bit more value added or useful. So any general questions on what we're doing here? Every crop will be different. Like it all depends on how much each crop is using. Like a canola crop will, I mean, and the time. Like flowering for canola, I'm guessing most irrigators go non-stop in the heat of the time just to keep up with your peak water demands. But usually, so these are all soil-based sensors. So we're triggering it once your soil can hold so much water in the root zone, right? So we're basing it on root zone. Once it hits that 50% of available water is what we're using to trigger. So we're using these sensors to kind of measure that value, and that's what we're using to trigger irrigation. And that's the other thing, like usually we see that farmers tend to over-irrigate. Usually peas and all that, a lot of crops are in that, well, 350, 300, 350, 400. So you're looking at your 12 to 14 inches total. But again, our water allocation is 12. So I mean, technically we should always have enough water. I mean, really that 12 inch usually should only get used up if you're on something like hay, where you're like into the 500-600 millimeters. For most field crops, usually we put on about 8 inches and then precipitation and soil moisture, and that gets us through. Potatoes, a little bit more, but that's more, I mean, you don't want to, there's so much money tied up in your potatoes, you don't want to risk anything there, right? So. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you should always, I mean, these sensors in general, these sensors should take into account that rainfall because it's going to change the soil moisture. We also have the Alberta irrigation model is on one of these replications. It takes in the data from the Outlook Environment Canada station and projects out on that. But yeah, you should always, irrigation, like rainfall is you don't want to be watering an inch, and you know that we've been getting some of these 2 to 3 inch rains. If you see that coming, you want to back off because that's definitely free water, right? So it depends how variable your land is. Usually most of the dealers of some of these sensors recommend about 3. 3 is a good one because if one's faulty, you can kind of see the other 2 are working normal, and a 1 number is way off, you know that's a faulty sensor. Where if you only have 2, you don't know which one might be the faulty one. Also, you want to then you can start picking and like I wouldn't put a sensor in a slough, right? Like, I mean, it's always going to be wet and you're never going to want to irrigate, and vice versa. On the top of the hill, you might be always dry, right? So try to pick something that's as much representative of your field as possible.